I woke up early, groggy from a restless night. The sun had just begun to spill through the blinds, casting faint golden streaks on the walls. It was a school day, so I swung my legs off the bed and rubbed my face before heading to my son's room to wake him up. I knocked on his door lightly. "Tom? Time to get up, buddy." No answer. I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The bed was empty. For a second, I just stood there, blinking at the neatly made sheets. That was odd. Tom was never one to wake up early on his own. He was 7 years old and had to be practically dragged out of bed most mornings. I checked the bathroom down the hall, expecting to find him groggily brushing his teeth. But the bathroom was empty too. I frowned. Maybe he was downstairs getting breakfast? That was unlike him, but kids had their quirks. My wife, Emily, stepped out of our bedroom, yawning as she ran a hand through her dark hair. She looked at me with mild confusion. "Who are you looking for?" she asked sleepily. I sighed. "Tom. He's not in his room." Her face went pale. "Who?" I stared at her. "Tom. Our son." She froze, her expression shifting from confusion to something else. Something deeper. "Michael, what are you talking about?" I let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Our son, Emily. Tom." She took a slow step backward. "Michael, we never had a son." A strange coldness crept through my chest. My heartbeat stuttered. "What?" I whispered. Emily's lips parted, and her eyes filled with something like fear. "Michael, we don't have kids." I laughed again, but this time it was hollow. "Emily, what the hell are you talking about?" "Tom. Our son. He's 7 years old, he loves dinosaurs, and he sleeps with that stupid stuffed T-Rex every night." "What is this? Some kind of joke?" She shook her head slowly, backing away from me as if I had lost my mind. "Michael, there's no Tom. We never had a child." My breath caught in my throat. My legs felt unsteady as I turned and practically ran back into Tom's room. But it wasn't Tom's room anymore. The walls, once covered with dinosaur posters, were blank. His toys, his books, his clothes, everything was gone. The bed was no longer a twin-sized kid's bed, but an empty, dusty closet. I staggered back, gripping the doorframe for support. My mind screamed that this was impossible, that I had tucked Tom into bed last night, that I had helped him with his homework, that I had kissed him goodnight. I spun back toward Emily, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "This isn't funny. Where is he?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Michael, please. You're scaring me." My heart pounded as I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and pulled up my photo album. I scrolled frantically, searching for a single picture of my son. A birthday, Christmas, his first day of school. But every picture was gone. Not just deleted, never there at all. The albums that should have been filled with his smiling face were empty. There was no evidence that Tom had ever existed. My stomach twisted violently, and nausea rose in my throat. My hands trembled as I dialed my mother's number. She answered after 2 rings. "Michael? Sweetheart? Are you okay?" I didn't waste time. "Mom, where is Tom?" A pause. "Who?" I felt like the world had dropped out from under me. "Tom. My son. Your grandson." "Mom, please tell me you remember him." A long, heavy silence. Then, in a gentle but concerned voice, she said, "Michael, are you feeling all right? You don't have children." I felt the phone slip from my fingers and clatter to the floor. This wasn't real. This wasn't possible. I had memories. Vivid, detailed memories. I remembered Tom's first steps. I remembered reading him bedtime stories. I remembered the way he hugged me so tightly around the neck when he was scared of thunderstorms. I remembered everything. So why didn't anyone else? And then my phone buzzed. A new message. The number was unfamiliar. My hands shook as I tapped the notification. A single sentence stared back at me. Black text on a blank screen. "You weren't supposed to remember." My breath hitched as I read the message again. "You weren't supposed to remember." My hands trembled as I stared at the screen, my mind racing. This wasn't some kind of prank. This wasn't a breakdown. Something had taken my son, and they expected me to forget. But I hadn't. My pulse pounded in my ears as I forced myself to move. I picked up the phone and quickly typed a response. Who is this? Where is my son? I hit send. Seconds ticked by. No response. Emily stood in the hallway, watching me with cautious eyes, as if I were some kind of wild animal ready to lash out. I knew how I must have looked. Panicked, disheveled, eyes wide with confusion and fear. Michael, she said softly. I think we should call someone. A doctor. You're not well. I turned to her sharply. Stop it. This isn't in my head. I remember Tom. I held him, Emily. I raised him with you. You can't just tell me he never existed. Tears slid down her cheeks. Michael, please. I don't know what's happening, but I swear to you, we've never had a child. A fresh wave of nausea rolled through me. I needed proof. Something that couldn't just disappear. I rushed down the stairs and into the living room, Emily calling my name behind me. I went straight to the bookshelf and yanked out our wedding album. If they had erased the digital photos, maybe they hadn't gotten to the physical ones. My hands flipped through the pages at a frenzied speed. Wedding pictures, our honeymoon, the early years in this house. But no Tom. No baby photos. No birthday parties. Nothing. I threw the album onto the floor with a strangled cry. My mind screamed in protest. This couldn't be happening. Couldn't. Then my phone buzzed again. I lunged for it. A new message. Stop looking. I let out a shaky breath, my fingers tightening around the phone. No, I wasn't going to stop. Whoever this was, whatever this was, they had taken my son. And I was going to get him back. I grabbed my car keys. Emily blocked the front door. Michael, you need help. Please don't go. Just talk to someone. I am going to talk to someone, I snapped, pushing past her. Someone who actually remembers our son. I didn't give her time to argue before I yanked open the door and stepped outside. I drove to the only other person who should remember Tom, his teacher, Mrs. Carter. I didn't bother calling ahead. If she had forgotten him, I needed to see it in her eyes. If she remembered, then maybe I wasn't crazy after all. I pulled up in front of her house, barely remembering the drive. My heart pounded as I rang the doorbell. A few moments later, Mrs. Carter opened the door, dressed in a loose sweater, her gray hair pulled back in a bun. Her brow furrowed as she looked at me. Mr. Walker? I swallowed hard. Mrs. Carter. My voice cracked. I need to ask you about Tom. Her expression didn't change. No recognition. No warmth. I'm sorry, who? My stomach dropped. My son, I said desperately. Tom Walker. He was in your class. 2nd grade. You've been his teacher for months. She frowned, shaking her head. I'm sorry, Mr. Walker, but I don't know that name. I staggered back. This was impossible. She had to remember him. I turned away, pressing a hand to my forehead. My vision blurred with panic and frustration. I had no proof, no photos, no documents, no witnesses. But I had my memories, and I wasn't going to let them take those from me too. Then I heard the door creak behind me. Mrs. Carter's voice was quieter this time, hesitant. Wait, I do remember something. I spun around. What? She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder before stepping out onto the porch, lowering her voice. I don't remember your son, Mr. Walker, but I do remember something strange happening a few weeks ago. A gap in my memory. I was teaching a lesson, and suddenly, I felt like I had forgotten something important. A student's name. But when I checked the roster, there was no missing student. I grabbed her arm. That was Tom. He was real. Her face paled. I don't know, she whispered. But if someone did make me forget, I don't think we should be talking about this. My phone buzzed again. I didn't check it this time. Mrs. Carter glanced at the phone, then back at me, her expression full of dread. You need to stop. Whoever took those memories, they don't want you looking. I stepped back, my mind spinning. I can't stop. He's my son. She swallowed hard. Then be careful, Mr. Walker. Some things aren't meant to be remembered. I drove home, my mind racing. If Mrs. Carter felt that something was missing, then I wasn't crazy. I wasn't alone. Someone had erased Tom. Not just from my life, but from existence itself. I pulled into the driveway and sat in the car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel tightly. My phone sat on the passenger seat, screen still lit from the unread message. I hesitated, then picked it up. You were warned. Then, before my eyes, the message deleted itself. I stared in horror as my entire message history, every trace of those messages, vanished. Then the screen went black. The phone powered off by itself. My heart pounded in my chest. I jumped out of the car, bolted to the front door, and rushed inside. The house was dark, silent. Emily? I called. No answer. A sense of wrongness filled the air. I moved cautiously through the house, my breath shaky. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to leave, but I forced myself to push forward. Then I saw the paper on the kitchen table. A single sheet with a message written in large, blocky letters. You should have forgotten. And beneath it, a photograph. My hands trembled as I picked it up. It was a picture of me and Emily, sitting on the couch, smiling. No Tom. But in the background, just barely visible, was a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the frame. Tall, unmoving, featureless, watching. My breath came in ragged gasps as I flipped the photo over. On the back, a single word was scrawled in shaky handwriting. Run. I dropped the photo. My hands were slick with sweat, my heart thundering so hard I thought it would burst. Something was in my house. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. The living room was empty. The hallway leading to the bedrooms stretched before me, dark and silent. I took a slow step forward, every instinct screaming at me to run. But I couldn't. Not yet. I had to find Emily. I forced my legs to move, creeping through the house with shallow breaths. I reached our bedroom door and pushed it open. The bed was made. Emily's things were gone. It was like she had never lived here at all. No, 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 I whispered, yanking open the closet. Empty. The drawers. Empty. I ran to the bathroom. Her toothbrush, her perfume, everything was gone. My phone buzzed again. I hesitated before looking at the screen. She's gone. Stop looking before you disappear too. I clenched my jaw. Rage bubbled up inside me, overpowering my fear. They had taken my son. Now my wife. No, I wasn't going to stop. I grabbed my keys and rushed back to the car. If Emily was gone, then maybe, just maybe, someone else had remembered her too. I drove to my mother's house, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. It was late, almost midnight, but I didn't care. I slammed on the brakes in her driveway, jumped out, and pounded on the door. A few seconds later, the porch light flickered on. My mom opened the door in her robe, her face tight with concern. Michael? She asked cautiously. What's wrong? I swallowed hard. Mom. Emily. Do you remember her? She frowned. Who? I felt like the air had been punched out of my lungs. Emily. My wife. Her face twisted in concern. Michael. You've never been married. I staggered back, shaking my head. No, that's not possible. You were at our wedding. You helped plan it. You held Tom when he was a baby. I stopped. Her expression was blank. Not just confused, empty. They had erased Emily, just like Tom. I backed away from the door, my mind spinning. My mother took a step forward. Michael, please. You need to come inside. Let's talk. I turned and ran. She called after me, but I didn't stop. I jumped into the car and peeled out of the driveway, my vision blurred by panic. They were wiping everything away, everyone I loved. And I was next. I had nowhere left to go. I pulled onto the shoulder of a deserted highway, gripping the steering wheel so hard my fingers ached. My breathing was shallow, erratic. I needed to figure out who was doing this, why they were doing this. My phone buzzed. I didn't want to look, but I had to. Another message from the unknown number. Last warning. Stop. I ignored it and started typing. Who are you? Send. Nothing. What do you want? Send. Still nothing. I tightened my grip on the phone. If they wouldn't answer, I'd force them to. I typed one more message. I remember. Send. For a moment, nothing happened. Then my car's radio switched on. Static. Then a voice. Low. Hollow. You shouldn't. My phone screen glitched, flashing erratic symbols. My headlights flickered. A figure appeared in the distance. Tall. Motionless. Watching from the side of the road. I couldn't see its face. Just a shape, barely illuminated by my headlights. Every hair on my body stood on end. The air around me changed. Felt wrong, like reality itself was unraveling. Then, in the static, I heard a whisper. Faint. Warped. Help me. Tom. My heart clenched. He was still out there. Somewhere. I looked at the figure again, my hands shaking. Then, in a blink, it was closer. I slammed the car into drive and floored it. The radio screamed with static as I sped down the empty road, my vision tunneling. The last thing I heard before the signal cut out completely was a single word. Run. I drove for hours, the road stretching endlessly before me. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stop. Eventually, exhaustion took over. My eyelids grew heavy, and I pulled into a roadside motel. The clerk barely looked at me as I paid in cash. I stumbled into the room, locking the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed, gripping my phone. I tried calling Emily again, but her number was gone. Not disconnected. Gone. No call history. No saved contact. No trace she had ever existed. I ran a hand through my hair, my body shaking. What was I supposed to do? How do you fight something that can erase people from existence? I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Then, a voice, a whisper, faint, inside the room. Dad? I bolted upright. The air was thick, suffocating. My breath hitched. I turned my head slowly. In the dim glow of the motel's flickering light, a small figure stood in the corner. A child, shaking, tears streaming down his face. Tom. I stared at him, my heart racing so fast I thought I'd pass out. Tom. I whispered. He didn't move, just stood there, eyes wide and glassy, like he was trapped somewhere far away. His small hands trembled at his sides, and he looked faded, like the colors in him were bleeding out. I shot up from the bed, my whole body trembling. Tom. It's me, buddy. It's Dad. I'm here. But as I stepped closer, a terrible feeling of wrongness seeped into the air. Tom took a shaky step back, his eyes flickering with fear. Dad, they're watching. His voice was thin, distant, like he was speaking from the bottom of a deep well. My chest tightened. Who's watching? Tom, who did this to you? He shivered, glancing over his shoulder at something unseen in the dark corner of the room. I'm not supposed to be here. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I reached out a hand, desperate to pull him to me. Tom, please, I'm gonna get you out of this. Just tell me what to do. He shook his head, a tear rolling down his cheek. You have to forget, Dad, or they'll take you too. His voice faded into static. My phone, lying on the bed, buzzed with a new message. My hand froze inches from Tom's shoulder as I looked back at the screen. This is your final warning. When I turned back to Tom, he was fading, flickering like a dying candle flame. No! I shouted, lunging forward. My hands passed through empty air. The static grew louder, filling the room, the air thick with it. I was alone again. Tom was gone. I sank to my knees, staring at the spot where my son had stood just moments ago. He'd been so close, close enough to touch. And now, the phone buzzed once more. My entire body shook as I picked it up, dread settling like a stone in my gut. The screen flashed a final message before the phone powered off completely. You have been warned. The lights in the room flickered. The air turned frigid, and I heard a low, guttural hum, like something was drawing closer. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Something was in the room with me. I backed away, my eyes darting around wildly. The motel walls seemed to warp, the edges of the room bending as if reality itself were being peeled away. Then, in the corner where Tom had stood, a shape emerged. Dark, human-shaped, a shadow that seemed to absorb the light around it. I couldn't make out any features, just a silhouette of blackness, its presence sending waves of cold terror through my veins. I stumbled backward, my legs hitting the bed frame. "What do you want?" I yelled, my voice cracking. "Where is my family?" The figure didn't move. It was as if it were waiting, just observing. I felt a chill in my spine, and suddenly I knew. This thing had been watching me the whole time. From the moment I realized Tom was gone. It had been there, in the photos, in the background, just out of sight. "Give them back!" I screamed, tears stinging my eyes. "You took them. Bring them back." A hollow whisper filled the room, soft and barely audible, like a voice carried on the wind. "Forget." "No!" I shouted. I won't forget them." The figure seemed to grow darker, the room dimming further around it. The static grew louder, sharper, like needles piercing my eardrums. Then, with an abrupt surge of cold air, the figure vanished, and everything went silent. The next morning, I woke up on the motel bed. My head pounded, and my eyes felt raw from crying. For a split second, I hoped it had all been a nightmare, a horrible, twisted dream. But the room was empty. Tom wasn't there. Emily wasn't there. The memory of that shadow lingered in the corner, like a stain on the air itself. I sat up, gripping my head in my hands. What the hell was I supposed to do? The police wouldn't help. They'd think I was insane. Everyone I knew had forgotten them. Every trace of their existence was gone. Except for me. My phone lay on the floor, dead. I picked it up, staring at the black screen, willing it to turn on, to connect me somehow to that thing. But it stayed dark. I forced myself to leave the motel room. The world outside seemed indifferent to my horror. The sky a dull gray as cars rolled by and people went about their day. It was surreal, standing there in the parking lot, feeling like I was in some kind of parallel universe. Was I the last person who remembered them? As I walked back to my car, the overwhelming sensation that I was being watched crept over me. I scanned the parking lot, half expecting to see the shadow again. But there was nothing. Then, across the street, I noticed something, a small playground. The kind you'd find in any suburban neighborhood. Slides, swings, a jungle gym. And on one of the swings, swaying gently back and forth, was a stuffed T-Rex. My heart skipped a beat. Tom's favorite toy. The one he took everywhere. I stumbled across the street, barely noticing the cars that honked as I crossed without looking. My eyes were locked on that swing, on the little green dinosaur that shouldn't be there. It was Tom's toy. I was sure of it. I reached out, my fingers brushing the worn fabric. The swing rocked slightly, as if pushed by an invisible hand. Attached to the dinosaur's neck was a small piece of paper, taped messily in place. I pulled it off with shaking hands and unfolded it. The message was simple. Remember. Tears filled my eyes as I hugged the toy to my chest. They were still out there, somewhere, and someone or something was giving me a chance. But I was running out of time. The shadows were closing in, and every memory I had of Tom and Emily felt like it was slipping through my fingers like sand. I didn't know who had taken them or why. I didn't know what these shadows wanted. But I knew I couldn't stop now. I couldn't forget. I wouldn't let them win. I tucked the stuffed dinosaur under my arm, climbed back into my car, and started the engine. There was no clear path ahead, no map, no destination. Just a desperate need to keep going, to keep remembering. As I drove away from the motel, I glanced in the rearview mirror. And there, just for a moment, I saw a shape. Dark, indistinct, standing by the playground, watching me leave. I didn't look back. I drove with no clear destination, just an overwhelming urgency to stay ahead of whatever was hunting me. The stuffed dinosaur sat in the passenger seat, a small, fragile link to my son. Proof that he was real, that this wasn't all in my head. The world outside blurred as I sped down the highway, gripping the wheel with white-knuckled hands. My mind raced with questions. Who had taken my family? Was Tom still alive? And why had someone left me that message? Remember? The answer had to be somewhere. Somewhere they hadn't erased. Then it hit me. Our old house. Before we'd moved here, we had lived in a small suburban neighborhood on the other side of town. Tom had spent his early years there. Maybe they hadn't erased everything. I swerved onto the next exit, my heart pounding with a mix of hope and terror. If there was anything left, any proof they existed, it would be there. The house was still standing, but it looked abandoned. The once vibrant blue paint was now faded and peeling, the lawn overgrown. It shouldn't have looked like this. Someone else had bought it after we left. But now it was as if no one had lived here in years. I parked on the curb, stepping out cautiously. The air was thick, heavy, like the world itself was holding its breath. I approached the front door and reached for the knob, half expecting it to vanish in my hand. Turned easily. The door creaked open. Inside, the house smelled of dust and neglect. The furniture was still there, our old furniture. The couch where Emily and I used to sit. The dining table where Tom had once spilled his juice. It was like stepping into a frozen moment from the past. I moved slowly, my breath shaky. If this place had been untouched by them, then I saw it. A photo. It sat on the mantel above the fireplace, coated in a fine layer of dust. My hands trembled as I picked it up. It was of me, Emily, and Tom. Tears blurred my vision. My son. His bright, toothy grin, his tiny hands holding my arm. Emily's soft smile as she looked at him. They hadn't erased this. The proof was real. A shuffling noise echoed from upstairs. I stiffened. I wasn't alone. I set the photo down carefully and turned toward the staircase. The air grew colder with each step I took. The shadows in the hallway seemed darker, stretching unnaturally across the walls. A soft whisper drifted through the silence. "Dad!" My breath caught in my throat. I reached the bedroom door at the end of the hall, the one that had once been Tom's. It was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The room was empty except for a single object in the middle of the floor. Another photo. I knelt and picked it up with shaking hands. It was of me, alone, standing in this very room. And behind me, a tall, featureless shadow. I sucked in a sharp breath and turned around, every nerve in my body screaming. But there was nothing, just the empty room. Then my phone buzzed. I slowly pulled it from my pocket, dread pooling in my stomach. The screen flickered before displaying a single message. "You're too late." A noise came from downstairs, a deep, inhuman hum vibrating through the walls. They were here. I bolted for the stairs, gripping the railing as I stumbled down. The entire house shifted. The walls seemed to stretch, distort, as if reality itself was unraveling. Shadows pooled in the corners, shifting, moving. The air rippled, and a heavy pressure crushed down on my chest. I barely made it to the front door before the lights cut out. Pitch darkness swallowed the house. And then, I felt it. Something behind me. Cold air brushed the back of my neck, and a whisper slithered into my ear. "Forget." No. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing every memory of Tom and Emily to the front of my mind. Their laughter, their voices, every moment I had with them. "I won't," I whispered. "You can't make me." The shadows thickened, pressing in from all sides. My vision blurred. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Forget." I felt my mind slipping, like something was peeling away my memories, trying to tear them from me piece by piece. No. I reached into my pocket and gripped the stuffed dinosaur. The only real thing I had left of Tom. I held on. I screamed into the darkness, forcing my memories to stay. The shadows shuddered. And then, a voice. Small, weak. "Dad!" Light exploded around me. I gasped, blinking rapidly as the darkness retreated. The room was bright again, the shadows gone. I turned and saw him, Tom, standing by the front door, his body solid, real. Tears streamed down his face. "Dad, you didn't forget me." I ran to him, pulling him into my arms, my heart nearly bursting. "I never will." And then, behind him, Emily. She stood there, eyes wide, trembling. But she was there, real. The air shifted again, but this time, the house felt lighter. The weight was gone. The shadows had retreated. We had won. I don't know how I got them back. Maybe the thing that took them couldn't erase someone who refused to forget. Maybe it underestimated how strong our memories were. But I do know this is still out there, watching, because sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I see it. A tall, featureless shadow, waiting, hoping that someday, I'll forget again. But I won't, ever. When we moved into our new house, I thought it was a fresh start. The neighborhood was quiet, the house spacious, and everything seemed perfect. My wife, Claire, was happy. Our son, Ethan, was excited about his new room. I told myself that life was finally settling into something good. But then the photos started changing. At first, it was subtle. A strange glare in the framed family picture on the living room wall, right across from the couch. I assumed it was just a trick of the light. Then, a few days later, I noticed something even stranger. Ethan's face looked blurred in one of the photos. I frowned, lifting the frame for a closer look. The picture had been taken just a few months ago, during his birthday party. He'd been holding up a cake with a giant 8 candle. But now his face looked smudged, as if someone had run a wet cloth over it. I showed Claire that night. She laughed. Must have gotten damaged when we packed it. I wasn't convinced, but I let it go, until I checked my phone. I scrolled through my gallery, pulling up the same picture from Ethan's birthday, and my stomach dropped. The entire photo was still there except for Ethan. He was gone. No smudging, no distortion. Just missing, like he had never been there at all. My hands shook as I flipped through more pictures. The ones from Christmas, our family vacation last summer, random snapshots of us laughing at home. Every single one was missing Ethan. My heart pounded. I ran downstairs, grabbed the framed photos from the walls, and checked each one. And one by one I realized Ethan was vanishing. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, my phone open, scrolling through every digital photo I had. I even checked my cloud backups. Nothing. No Ethan. The memories were still in my head, crystal clear. I remembered taking those pictures. I remembered his laugh, his excitement. So why was he disappearing? At dawn, I decided to check Ethan's room. Maybe this was all in my head. Maybe I was exhausted from the stress of moving. I opened his door. And for a moment, everything seemed normal. His bed was unmade like usual. His toys were scattered across the floor. His backpack was by the desk. I let out a shaky breath. He's still here. He's real. Then I noticed something that made my blood turn cold. The family photo he kept on his nightstand. The one with all 3 of us at the beach last summer. It was empty. The background was still there. The sand, the ocean, the bright blue sky. But the 3 of us? Gone. Just a blank, lifeless beach. A lump formed in my throat. My hands were ice cold as I backed away, bumping into the doorframe. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. I needed to tell Claire. I turned and nearly screamed. She was standing right behind me. Jesus, Claire, I gasped, my heart racing. You scared the hell out of me. She didn't respond. Her eyes were locked on the empty picture in my hand. Her face was pale. Daniel, she whispered. Where's Ethan? I blinked at her. What do you mean? He's asleep. She shook her head slowly, her breathing uneven. No, Daniel. He's not in his bed. My stomach clenched. I turned back toward the bed, and Ethan was gone. The blankets were still slightly rumpled, the pillow indented where his head had been. But the room was empty. I sprinted to the closet, throwing open the doors. Nothing. I checked under the bed, the bathroom, every corner of the house. Ethan was nowhere. Claire was crying by the time I ran back downstairs. She clutched my arms, shaking. Where is he? She sobbed. Daniel, where is our son? My throat was dry. I don't know. Then my phone buzzed. A new message. From an unknown number. I swallowed hard and looked at the screen. A single message stared back at me. They disappear first. Then you. Claire was still crying. clutching my arms so tightly her nails dug into my skin. But I barely felt it. My mind was stuck on the message. They disappear first. Then you. My hands trembled as I showed her the phone. She wiped her eyes and stared at the screen, her expression shifting from fear to sheer horror. Daniel? Who sent that? She whispered. I had no answer. I tried calling the number, but it went straight to a dead line. No ringing, no voicemail, just silence. I turned back to Claire. We need to call the police. She nodded, but something in her eyes told me she already knew what I was afraid to admit. How do you tell the police your child is missing when there's no trace of him anywhere? When the officers arrived, I did my best to explain. I told them Ethan had been sleeping in his bed last night, that I had woken up to find his photos changing, his face vanishing, that Claire and I had searched the entire house, but he was just gone. But when they asked for pictures, my stomach clenched. I pulled up my phone and scrolled frantically. Nothing. Every photo I had of Ethan was missing. No baby pictures, no school portraits, nothing. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Sir, one of them said carefully, do you have a recent photo of your son? He's in the pictures, I said through gritted teeth. He was there before. I swear to God, he was there. Claire sat on the couch, hugging her arms, her face pale. We're not crazy, she whispered. He's real. Ethan is real. The officers looked at each other again. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, are you sure you have a son? I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I stood up abruptly, knocking over the coffee table. What did you just say? The younger officer stepped back slightly, his face cautious. We're just trying to understand. There are no records of a child named Ethan Carter living here. My blood ran cold. That's not possible. The officer pulled out a tablet and tapped a few times. Then he turned the screen toward me. It was a property record. And under residence, there were only two names. Daniel Carter. Claire Carter. No Ethan. My breath came in short gasps. This wasn't happening. This wasn't real. But then I saw Claire. She was shaking. Her lips trembled. Her hands gripping the fabric of her sweater, so hard her knuckles turned white. And the worst part? Her eyes looked uncertain, as if she was trying to remember, as if something was pulling the memories away. No, I muttered, shaking my head. No, no, and oh. You remember, Claire. Tell them we have a son. She opened her mouth, and then her face went blank. Her hands fell to her sides. Who? The world tilted. I felt like I was going to be sick. Claire blinked at me, her breathing slowing. Daniel? Who are we talking about? I stumbled back, gripping my head. This wasn't possible. This wasn't happening. Just this morning, Claire had been sobbing, desperate to find Ethan. Now she was looking at me like I was a stranger. The officers shifted uncomfortably. One of them spoke into his radio. We might need a wellness check here. I grabbed Claire by the shoulders, shaking her. Ethan, our son. You remember him. Please, Claire, you have to remember. She just looked at me, confused, like the name meant nothing to her, like she had already forgotten. Then my phone vibrated in my pocket. I fumbled for it, dread settling in my stomach. A new message from the unknown number. You're next. And just like that, Claire's expression changed. Her eyes flickered, like something inside her had just shut off. Then, she screamed. A blood-curdling, ragged scream that wasn't hers. Her body convulsed, her limbs twitching unnaturally. The officers lunged forward, grabbing her, trying to hold her still. Call an ambulance, one of them shouted. I was frozen in place. My hands clamped over my ears as she screamed and screamed and screamed, until, just as suddenly, she stopped. Claire slumped forward, her body going limp. The officers eased her onto the couch, checking her pulse. She was breathing, alive, but when her eyes fluttered open, they were empty. No fear, no recognition, no emotion. She looked at me, her lips parting slightly. Who are you? My world shattered. I stumbled back, shaking my head, while rising in my throat. No, I choked out. No, 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 they took you too. Claire sat motionless on the couch, staring through me like I wasn't even there. The officers were still speaking into their radios, calling for medical backup, but their voices sounded distant, muffled, like I was slipping away from reality. I turned and ran, out the door, down the street, away from the house, from the police, from everything. I ran until my lungs burned, until my vision blurred. And when I finally stopped, gasping for air, I pulled out my phone. One last message was waiting for me. No one will remember you either. My hands disappeared. For a split second, I saw the outline of my fingers. Then they faded, like smoke curling into the air. My arms followed. My legs. I screamed, but no one looked at me. People walked past, not seeing me at all. I was vanishing, just like the photos, just like Ethan, just like Claire. I was the last one to disappear. And then, I was gone. I got home late that night. The drive had been long. The office had drained me, and all I wanted was to collapse into bed. But as I pulled into the driveway, something felt off. The house was lit up from the inside, a warm glow spilling from the windows. Through the glass, I could see shadows moving. My family. Claire was in the kitchen, setting the table. Our son, Ben, sat at the counter, swinging his legs, chatting about school. Our daughter, Lily, was laughing at something. It was so normal, but something felt wrong. I stepped out of the car, rubbing my temples. Maybe I was just exhausted. I pushed open the front door, inhaling the familiar scent of home. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, something warm and comforting. Claire turned, smiling at me. Hey, you made it home just in time for dinner. Ben grinned. Dad, you gotta hear what happened at school today. Lily giggled, pushing her hair behind her ear. It's so funny. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head at myself. See? I was just imagining things. I smiled. All right, let's eat. I sat at the table as Claire placed a plate in front of me. Steam rose from the food, the smell rich and savory. It looked perfect. Too perfect. I blinked. My head was swimming. Something still felt wrong. I reached for my spoon, but as I lifted it to my mouth, my fingers brushed Claire's hand. Her skin crumbled to dust. I gasped, jerking back. My spoon clattered to the plate, my heartbeat slamming against my ribs. Claire froze, her eyes widening. Then, slowly, her entire body began to disintegrate. Her mouth opened like she wanted to scream, but no sound came. Her arms, her hair, her face, all of it turned to ash. Within seconds, she was gone. Only her clothes remained, collapsed on the chair like a deflated balloon. I shot to my feet, the chair screeching against the floor. Claire! Ben and Lily stared at me, their eyes wide. Then, Ben's skin flaked away like dry paper, vanishing before my eyes. Lily let out a choked sob. Then her lips dissolved into dust, her eyes collapsing into empty sockets. Within moments, they were gone too. Their clothes lay limp on the chairs, as if they had never been there at all. I staggered back, my entire body trembling. My breath came in ragged gasps. I turned to the table. The food was ash. Everything on the plates, the chicken, the mashed potatoes, even the glasses of water, nothing but gray, powdery ashes. My stomach twisted violently. Then I heard it. A voice, low, hollow, from the depths of the house. You're back too late. A cold wave of terror rolled through me. I turned toward the hallway, where the voice had come from. The shadows there seemed deeper, darker. I felt something watching me from that void. Something waiting. My hands clenched into fists. I forced myself to move, to take a step forward. And then, the lights went out. The house plunged into darkness. My breath hitched. The only sound was the blood pounding in my ears. Then, a shuffle from deep in the hallway. Something was in the house with me. I reached for my phone, fumbling with shaking fingers. But when I pressed the power button, the screen was dead. I forced a breath. Claire, I whispered. Ben? Lily? Silence. Then, from the hallway, a soft tap, like fingernails against wood. I turned toward the sound, my pulse hammering. The air in the house felt thicker, heavy with something unseen. I took a hesitant step forward, my foot scuffing against the floor. The tap came again, closer this time. Something was waiting for me in the dark. A voice, not mine, not human, whispered from the shadows. "You're back too late." My stomach twisted. I had heard those words before. But where? Then, a shape moved in the blackness. Tall, unmoving, watching. My legs refused to move. Couldn't breathe. The silence stretched, suffocating. Then, the shape lurched forward. A wave of cold slammed into me as I stumbled backward, crashing into the dining table. Plates and silverware clattered to the floor, but I barely noticed. The shape was closer now. Couldn't see a face. Only a shadowy outline, a thing that didn't belong here. It moved with unnatural stillness, as if it was shifting through space without actually walking. Then it spoke again. "You left them alone too long." My breath came in ragged gasps. I turned, bolting toward the front door. My hands fumbled with the lock. The cold air pressed against my back. I could feel it right behind me. The lock turned. I yanked the door open and lunged outside. I hit the pavement hard, my palms scraping against the concrete. The night was silent. No wind, no cars. The entire neighborhood was dead still. I scrambled to my feet and turned back to the house. The windows were dark. The door hung open, revealing nothing but blackness inside. It didn't look like a home anymore. It looked like a hole, like something had hollowed it out. My breath shook. My family was gone. The house was empty. And then, my phone buzzed. I jolted, my hand still trembling as I pulled it from my pocket. The screen was lit. One new message. Unknown number. "You should have been home sooner." I dropped the phone. And from inside the house, a soft voice. "Lily. Daddy." I stopped breathing. My little girl. My baby. I turned toward the open doorway. The darkness inside shifted. Something moved in there. I took a slow step forward. My mind screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. I had to know. Was she still in there? Was there still a chance? I stood at the threshold, my fingers gripping the doorframe. The air inside was freezing. Then, something reached out. A hand. Small. Pale. It stretched from the shadows, just barely visible in the dim porch light. Lily's hand. My heart pounded. "Lily," I whispered. "Baby, is that you?" A pause. Then, a voice that wasn't hers. "Come inside." A trick. It was a trick. I stumbled back. "No!" The hand snapped back into the dark. And then, the door slammed shut. I don't remember how long I stood there. Maybe minutes. Maybe hours. The house was silent now, like it had swallowed them whole. My family was gone. I had lost them, because I had come home too late. And whatever had taken them, was still waiting for me. I came home late that night, exhausted from work. The streetlights cast long shadows over the sidewalk as I fumbled for my keys. My body ached, my mind foggy from the long day. I just wanted to get inside, kiss my wife, check on the kids, and collapse into bed. I unlocked the front door and stepped in. A family stood in the hallway. A man, a woman, 2 children, all staring at me. I froze. "Who the hell are you?" I demanded, my heart slamming in my chest. The woman frowned, pulling the little girl closer to her. "Excuse me?" The man stepped forward. "That's our question," he said, his tone edged with confusion. "And something else. Who are you?" I blinked. This is my house. I live here." The woman's eyes darkened. "No, you don't." I turned to the living room, my breath quickening. The couch wasn't ours. The pictures on the wall, photos of them, of their smiling faces, weren't mine. The coffee table, the decorations, even the smell of the house. None of it was ours. I felt like I was going to be sick. "No," I muttered, backing up. "This is my house. I live here. My wife, Claire. Where is she?" Where's my son? The man stiffened. There's no one named Claire here. The woman's face twisted in concern. I think you need help. I shook my head violently. No. This doesn't make sense. I turned toward the staircase, my staircase, ready to run up to the bedrooms and find them. The man blocked my way. Hey, he said sharply. I need you to leave. I shoved past him. His hands grabbed at my sleeve, but I tore free, bolting up the stairs. Behind me, I heard the woman scream, "Call the police!" But I didn't care. I ran to my bedroom, heart hammering. The door was wrong. It wasn't our bedroom door. It was different, painted white instead of dark brown. The handle was round, not the flat silver one I had installed myself last year. I grabbed it and pushed inside. Not my room. Different bed. Different sheets. Different everything. This wasn't my house. But it was. Something was wrong. Something had changed. I backed away, my head swimming, my chest tightening. A loud bang sounded from downstairs. The front door. The police. I heard heavy footsteps rushing up the stairs. A voice boomed, "Sir, get on the ground." I turned, my head spinning. "No," I choked out. "This is my house. Where is my family?" The officers stormed toward me. I raised my hands, my breathing ragged. "They're real," I gasped. "My wife, my son, they're real." But as I spoke, I realized something terrifying. I couldn't picture their faces. I could remember their names, our life together, our home. But their faces were gone, like something had wiped them from my mind. My legs buckled. I collapsed to my knees as the officers restrained me, pushing my face to the carpet. Tears blurred my vision. I had a family. I had a life. So why did it feel like none of it had ever existed? The officers dragged me down the stairs, their grips firm, unrelenting. My mind was still spinning, my breath shallow. I had a family. I had a wife, a son, a home. But now it was all gone. The couple stood in the hallway, the woman clutching her children, fear in her eyes. The man, his arms crossed tightly, watched with suspicion. "Sir," one of the officers said, tightening the cuffs around my wrists, "you're trespassing. We need to take you in." I struggled against them, panic flaring in my chest. "No, this is my house. I live here. I have a wife and son." The officers exchanged glances. "Sir," one of them said carefully, "you're listed as having no immediate family." My stomach dropped. I shook my head, my voice trembling. No, that's not right. Check again. Claire Carter. My wife. Ethan Carter. My son. They live here. This is our home." The officers stared at me. Then one of them pulled out a tablet and tapped on the screen. A few moments later, he turned it toward me. My own face stared back at me from a public record file. And beneath my name, no spouse, no children, lives alone. I felt like the world had been ripped out from under me. "This isn't right," I whispered. "This can't be right." The other officer sighed. "Come on, let's go." They hauled me out the door. I struggled one last time, my voice breaking. "My wife, my son, they're real." The woman clutched her children tighter. The man shook his head. "Get him out of here," he muttered. As they shoved me into the squad car, I caught one last glimpse of the house, of the warm, yellow glow inside, of the framed photos on the walls, their family, my home, but not mine anymore. Or maybe it never was. I spent the night in a holding cell, my mind unraveling. I sat on the hard bench, staring at the floor, trying to force my wife's face back into my memory. But the harder I tried, the more it slipped away. By morning, I was released. No charges. Just a long look from the officers and a warning to seek help. I walked out into the cold morning air, feeling wrong, empty, like something had peeled away my life, layer by layer, until there was nothing left. I had nowhere to go, so I went to the only place I could think of, my mother's house. She answered the door, her face filling with confusion. "Daniel." The moment she said my name, I exhaled in relief. She remembered me. She knew who I was. Mom! I choked out. Something's wrong. Something is very, very wrong. I stepped inside, the familiar scent of her home wrapping around me like a fragile comfort. She led me to the couch, her eyes filled with concern. Tell me what's wrong, sweetie. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to steady my breathing. It's Claire. And Ethan. They're gone. She frowned. Who? I felt a cold spike of fear. Claire, I whispered. My wife. Ethan, my son. She shook her head, her brow furrowing deeper. Daniel, you've never been married. You don't have kids. My hands clenched into fists. No, no. I stood up abruptly, pacing the room. That's not possible. Mom, you were at our wedding. You helped us move into the house. You held Ethan when he was a baby. She blinked slowly. Sweetheart, you've always lived alone. A shudder passed through me. This was a nightmare, a sick joke. But then, something caught my eye. A photo album sitting on the coffee table. One I had seen 100 times before. I grabbed it, flipping through the pages, my hands trembling. Pictures of me as a child. Family gatherings. Vacations. Then the more recent ones. I should have seen my wedding photos. My first picture with Claire. The day Ethan was born. But instead, every single picture was just me. Always alone. I sank onto the couch, my vision blurring. It was like they had never existed. Like they had been scrubbed from my life. And the worst part? I could barely remember what they looked like. Like my own mind was betraying me. I felt my mother's hand on my shoulder. Maybe you should lie down, sweetie. Get some rest. I looked up at her, and for a split second something shifted. Her face blurred, like an out-of-focus photograph. I blinked rapidly. She was normal again, smiling softly, but my stomach twisted with dread, because I had the sickening feeling that she was next. I barely slept that night. I lay in the guest room at my mother's house, staring at the ceiling, my mind unraveling. Claire, Ethan, my home, all of it gone. And now, something was wrong with my mother. That moment earlier when her face had blurred, it had been so fast. A flicker like a glitch in reality. Like something was erasing her too. I turned onto my side, gripping my phone. I had spent hours searching online, but nothing helped. No missing person reports. No records of Claire or Ethan anywhere. It was like they had never existed. And worst of all, the memories were slipping. I could still feel love for them, still feel their presence in my heart, but their faces were fading. I squeezed my eyes shut. I wasn't going to let this happen. I needed proof. I needed to find something they couldn't erase. At dawn, I got up and crept downstairs. The house was silent, my mother still asleep. I found the photo albums in the living room, the ones that had always been there, filled with childhood pictures, family gatherings. I flipped through them, my hands trembling, but every single picture of me, from birth to adulthood, was alone. My mother, my father, aunts, uncles, old friends, but no Claire, no Ethan, as if they had never been part of my life at all. I clenched my jaw, flipping faster. Then, near the back of the album, I found something strange. A blank space where a photo had been ripped out. The page was slightly torn, a faint outline of where a picture had once been glued. My heart pounded. Something had been removed. Proof. I wasn't crazy. I needed to find the missing picture. I was about to search deeper when I heard footsteps. I turned. My mother stood in the doorway. Her eyes were empty, not tired, not confused, blank, like something was missing inside her. Mom, I whispered. She tilted her head slightly. Who are you? A wave of cold horror crashed over me. No, I choked. No, 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 Mom, it's me. It's Daniel. Your son. She just blinked, as if the words meant nothing. Something inside me snapped. I grabbed her shoulders, shaking her. Please, you have to remember me. You have to remember. Her lips parted slightly, and for a second, her face blurred again, like a smudge on reality. I let go and stumbled back. Her expression didn't change. Then, she smiled. Soft, warm, but wrong. She turned and walked silently into the kitchen, like I wasn't even there, like I was already gone. I left that morning. I had no choice. She wasn't my mother anymore. Or maybe she just didn't remember she had a son. And if she had forgotten me, how long before the world did too? I drove for hours, my thoughts spinning. I had to find something real, something to prove they had existed. Then I remembered our old house, before we moved into the one that had been taken from me. Maybe, just maybe, they hadn't erased everything. I turned the car around and headed for the only place left that might hold answers. The place where our life had begun. The house was abandoned. The windows were dark. The yard overgrown. Shouldn't have been. A new family had bought it years ago. But now, it was like no one had lived there in a long, long time. A deep unease settled in my chest. I stepped up to the porch, my fingers grazing the old wooden railing. The front door was unlocked. I pushed it open. Inside, dust coated everything. The air was stale, thick with forgotten memories. I moved slowly through the house, my heart hammering. The furniture was still there, our old furniture, like a frozen moment in time. And then, I saw it. A photo. Sitting on the mantel above the fireplace. My hands shook as I picked it up. It was of me, and Claire and Ethan. They were real. Tears burned in my eyes as I ran my fingers over the image. This was it. Proof. Then I turned the photo over. There was something written on the back. A message, scrawled in shaky handwriting. I read it, and my blood turned to ice. They're still here. A creak sounded behind me. My breath hitched. The air turned frigid. Slowly I turned. And there, in the dark hallway, a figure stood. Unmoving. Watching. Tall. Featureless. A shadow where a person should be. A voice, low, hollow, echoed in my head. You shouldn't have remembered. The lights flickered. The walls shuddered. And then, the figure moved. Straight toward me. The figure lurched forward. The air in the house collapsed around me. Heavy, suffocating, pressing into my chest like an unseen weight. I staggered back, clutching the photo of Claire and Ethan. My fingers tightened around it. Proof. The shadow moved closer. Its form shuddered, flickering at the edges like a bad signal. No face, no eyes, just a void in the shape of a person. A hole in reality. My voice came out in a broken whisper. Who are you? The figure tilted its head. And then, a voice. Low, hollow, like a whisper threading through my skull. You were not supposed to remember. A pulse of cold air blasted through the room, making me stumble. I clutched the photo tighter. Where is my family? The figure shuddered. The air around it rippled, as if it were peeling away the space it stood in. Gone. My stomach twisted. No, they weren't. I had proof. I raised the photo in my shaking hand. They were here. I remember them. The shadow stilled. Then slowly, it lifted an arm. The shape of a hand formed, long fingers stretching toward me. And then the photo in my hand began to fade. My breath hitched. No, I whispered, watching in horror as the image of Claire and Ethan blurred, darkened, vanished. The paper wilted into dust in my palm. A deep, distant roar filled the air, like a train screaming through a tunnel. And then I felt it, my memories unraveling. The images in my head, Claire's laugh, Ethan's tiny hand in mine, the warmth of our home, slipping away, like threads being pulled from fabric. Like something was erasing them. I screamed. I wouldn't forget. I grabbed my head, forcing my mind to hold onto their faces. I wouldn't let them win. I wouldn't let them take my family away. The shadow lurched forward. It reached for me, and the world blinked out. I woke up in a hospital. The ceiling above me was a dull white. The sound of distant voices and beeping monitors filled the air. My body felt wrong, weak, empty. I tried to sit up, but my limbs were heavy, my mind fogged. A nurse noticed me and rushed over. Mr. Carter? Can you hear me? I swallowed, my throat dry. What happened? She gave me a gentle smile. You were found wandering the streets. You were confused, disoriented. The police brought you here. I frowned, trying to remember. The house, the shadow, the photo. My family. My voice cracked. Where are they? The nurse hesitated. Then, sympathy filled her eyes. Mr. Carter, she said softly. You've never been married. My heart stopped. You live alone, she continued. You always have. No, that wasn't true. I remembered Claire. I remembered Ethan. Didn't I? Their faces. I tried to picture them, but nothing. Just a blank, hollow space where memories should be. Like an empty frame where a photo had once been. I felt cold. Numb. The nurse touched my arm. You're going to be okay. Just rest. She smiled kindly, but her eyes, for a split second, they blurred. Just like my mother's had. Just like the photo. Just like my life. And deep inside my head, buried beneath the fog, I heard the voice. Low, hollow. You were not supposed to remember. And then, nothing. I woke up in the middle of the night with a strange feeling. The kind you can't explain, the weight of something being off, like the air had changed while I was sleeping. I sat up slowly. The room was dark, but something felt wrong. The house was too quiet. I swung my legs over the bed and stood up. The hallway stretched before me, empty and still. I checked my son's room first. The door was slightly open. I pushed it wider and whispered, "Ben!" The bed was empty. The covers were pulled back neatly, like no one had ever slept there. My stomach tightened. I checked the closet, the drawers, the bookshelves. His toys, his clothes, everything was gone. Like his room had never belonged to a child at all. A tremor ran through me. I turned and ran to my wife's room. The door was open, and inside, nothing. No furniture, no clothes, no framed wedding photo on the nightstand. Just an empty room. A wave of nausea hit me. I clutched the doorframe, my breathing ragged. This was wrong. So wrong. I turned and sprinted down the stairs. The living room, bare. No couch. No TV. No framed pictures on the wall. I rushed to the kitchen. Empty. No dishes, no chairs, no signs that anyone had ever eaten here. It was like my family had never existed. And then I saw it. A single piece of paper sitting on the kitchen counter. My hands shook as I picked it up. There was one sentence scrawled across it. You lived here alone. Always. My vision blurred. My mind screamed that this wasn't true. I had a wife. I had a son. Didn't I? A sharp pain stabbed through my skull. My thoughts tangled, slipping through my grasp like water. I tried to picture their faces. Nothing. No image. No voice. Just a hollow space. Like something had erased them. Like they had never been real at all. And then, the lights flickered. And I felt it. Something standing right behind me. I didn't turn around. Couldn't. The air behind me was heavy. Thick with an unnatural stillness. My skin crawled. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But where? This wasn't my house anymore. Maybe it never had been. The lights flickered again. And then, a voice. Low, hollow, right at my ear. You lived here alone. Always. A cold shudder ran through me. My breath hitched in my throat. I gripped the counter so hard my knuckles ached. I had a choice. I could give in, accept the lie, let my mind be rewritten. Or, I could fight. I spun around. Nothing was there. The kitchen was empty. The air silent. But I wasn't fooled. I could feel it watching me. I turned back to the paper, gripping it tightly. My hands trembled. My pulse pounding in my ears. I needed proof. Something to anchor myself. I stumbled toward the front door, yanking it open. A cold wind rushed in, sharp against my skin. The street outside was dead silent. No cars. No people. No sound. Like the whole world had stopped. I ran to my car, gasping for air. I flung open the door and grabbed my phone. I scrolled through my photos, my hands shaking. All gone. No Claire. No Ben. No wedding pictures. No birthday parties. Just empty landscapes. Blank walls. like I had spent my entire life alone. My throat tightened. I clenched my teeth. No, I whispered. I wouldn't let them take my memories. I wouldn't let them win. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered once. Then, silence. The radio flickered on. Static. Then, through the distortion, a voice. You lived here alone. Always. The same words. Over and over. A hand pressed against the car window. I screamed. I didn't see a face, just a shadow. A tall, featureless shape pressing against the glass. I fumbled for the door handle, throwing myself out of the car. My heart pounded as I stumbled backward, my breath coming in short gasps. The shadow didn't move. It just stood there watching me, and then tilted its head, like it was curious. My phone buzzed. I hesitated, then looked down. A new message. From an unknown number. Stop remembering. I stared. And then, the streetlights went out. The world was swallowed by darkness. And the shadow moved. Straight for me. The darkness swallowed everything. For a second, there was no sound. No wind. No footsteps. Just a horrible, endless silence. Then the shadow lunged. I turned and ran. I didn't think, I just moved. My legs burned as I sprinted down the street, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But no matter how far I ran, the road stretched on forever. My house, the house that wasn't mine anymore, stayed in the distance, frozen in place. I wasn't escaping. I was trapped. The streetlights flickered once. And then, I was back in my driveway, as if I had never left. I staggered to a stop, my stomach twisting. I turned around, and the shadow was already there. Close. Too close. A mass of blackness, shifting like smoke, warping the air around it. My entire body locked up, paralyzed by fear. Then it spoke. Not with words, but with thoughts. A whisper inside my head. You lived here alone. Always. I clenched my teeth, my hands trembling. No, I didn't. My voice shook. I had a wife, a son. I remember them. The shadow shuddered. For the first time, it hesitated. A flicker of movement, like something shifting behind a veil. I felt it then, doubt. I took a slow step forward. If I was alone, I whispered. Why are you trying so hard to make me forget? The air changed. The shadow twitched violently, its form rippling, like it was breaking apart. I pushed harder. You've been erasing them. My memories, my home, my past. My voice grew stronger. But you missed something. The shadow froze. I lifted my phone, my hands shaking. And for the first time, I saw it. A photo. One last image they hadn't erased. It was dark, grainy. But there, in the corner of the frame, was Claire's face. Not completely gone. Not yet. The shadow let out a horrible, distorted sound. It lunged for me, but I didn't run. I gripped the phone tighter, and I remembered. I forced every detail of my family into my mind. Ben's laugh, Claire's voice, the smell of pancakes in the kitchen on Sunday mornings. I held on to them. I wouldn't forget. The world around me shuddered. The street warping. The sky splitting apart. The shadow screamed. And then, everything collapsed. I woke up in my bed. The morning light filtered through the window. For a second, everything was normal. Had it been a dream? I sat up slowly, my heart still pounding. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone. I opened my gallery, and I saw it. A photo of Claire, of Ben, clear as day, smiling at me. I let out a shaky breath. I got out of bed and walked to the hallway. Ben's room was there, his bed messy, his toys scattered across the floor. Claire's door was open. I smelled coffee brewing downstairs. Laughter echoed from the kitchen. My family was back. They had never been gone. Or maybe I had simply refused to let them be erased. But sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet, I still hear it. A whisper, deep in the dark. Forget, but I never will.